Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the Daily Biz Link. Jane Cebrynski is back to join us again for a conversation on how it's all about change right now. Jane, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Certainly, a lot has changed just since our last conversation. Just when we didn't think more change could happen to us, we are in truly one of the most memorable seasons of change. But before we begin, I'd love to find out, do you have a 10 moment?
I do. Actually, this morning I met with my marketing consultant who's phenomenal and always helps give me, more direction as far as what I should be focusing my time and my efforts on as it relates to A to Z BizLink. And due to all the change that's happening in this world, we had a really helpful and productive conversation about how we're adapting our platform to better serve the needs of our business community. So that was definitely a 10 moment for me today.
Yay. And it's okay if there aren't any 10 moments right now because it is a really difficult time. But certainly, if we find them, we want to grab hold of them and hang on to them.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important to have gratitude and to find those things that we are grateful for.
Yeah. Well, I coach in change. That's what I do all day long. And certainly, I've been through my own personal and professional changes. And so I'm glad that we're having this conversation today because certainly everything we've been focused on for the last several weeks has been about change. And we are in a bigger season of change than we ever have experienced, I think, in many of our lifetimes. So I'm really glad we're having that conversation. You and I've talked about this a lot because change is hard. We've talked about the book Change or Die that has been written many years ago, but studies have shown that 9 out of 10 people would rather die than change because it's really difficult. And they use, studies from heart patients to support the fact that change is really difficult. And so we can see that, both in our individual desires to change, and now we're seeing it on a much bigger scale that change can be really difficult. And that's why they call it a 10% club.
I think a lot of us have had a little bit more time to do some self-reflection and to think through, the opportunities or changes that we may need to make, but may not necessarily know, what is required in order to make those changes. So Jane, do you have any tips on how to go about navigating that?
Sure. If you have a desire first to change, that's the most important thing because, excuse me, I can't coach and want someone to change more than they want it for themselves. And so I think right now, a lot of people do have a desire. And we know from studies that in order to sustain change, we need 3 things. We need new hope, new skills, and new thinking. And that new hope generally comes from a relatability factor or ability to identify with someone or a community or a system that says, okay, I believe the change can happen. So oftentimes if I'm working with an individual, I might be that first hope. I'm the first person, that first relationship that gives them hope that change can happen. And then you got to get new skills. So if you don't know how to make the change, you've got to practice something. You've got to get some new skills. And we introduce a lot of tools that then you go out and you practice. And hopefully the more you practice it, you get the new thinking from it. So what's really important though, is you might not get all 3 in any particular order. So you may go out and practice something, not sure whether or not it's going to work or not really having any hope, but you're willing to go out and practice it. And then the more you do it, you get the new thinking from it, and then that gives you the new hope. So it doesn't necessarily happen in any particular order, but we do know from studies that in order to sustain it over a long period of time, you've got to have all 3.
And I think we feel a little bit more comfortable in that process if we can get a little bit of training to help guide us through that. I know we are planning on covering the topic of diversity and inclusion on June 23rd via the A to Z BizLink platform. And that conversation specifically will be related to tips and winning strategies to have impactful conversations within your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And just having that ability to hear some training or tips from other professionals hopefully will give them, those new skills that they need for effective communication. So on that front, communication is a key component to all of this. And so I'd like to pick your brain on that specific element.
I love that because that is truly what not only have I been hearing and what I've been listening to, but also what I've been coaching in. And, what's very powerful, for example, let's say the change you want to make personally is to understand. And so the skill you may need to practice is being a better listener. And what does that mean? Well, we know there's 3 levels of listening. So at the very least, we have to be at a level of listening that is about curiosity. So it's not about me providing the answers. It's about me listening and asking questions to be more curious. And then if you practice that enough, and you can practice that at home, you can practice that at work, you can practice that by when you watch the media, you can practice that by engaging with strangers. If you want to practice being a better listener, then go out and listen, and truly listen with the intent of, I don't have to have any answers, I don't have to respond, but I'm just going to practice listening. And then maybe the more you practice listening, it gives you some new thinking. So, wow, when I do that, I do understand better. Oh, I am shifting my perspective because I've taken the time to listen. And I know that just within the African American community that I coach in and that I'm a part of, I've got coaches, they're just saying, listen. And so as a coaching team, because I'm a part of a team as well, we are doing just that. We are practicing listening. And so, so that's an example of how you can change. You've got to have hope that you can change first and foremost, maybe, or you go out and you practice it and you get the new thinking. And then that gives you the hope that change can happen. The other thing we've talked about a lot is the different communication styles. And when you can honor that everybody's style is a little bit different than yours, and it allows you then to also practice listening a little bit better, because you're not listening with judgment. You're not listening from a perspective that my communication style is better or more effective. The other most powerful tool, I think, right now, as it relates to communication, is the tool we use, I don't know their story. And if you can simply anchor in, I don't know their story. And again, this is something you can practice, right? So this is a skill. If you want to become a better communicator, if you want to become a better listener, then the tool is, I don't know their story. And what that tool does is, number one, it allows you to not judge so quickly. And you can decide, do I want to know their story or do I not want to know their story? And then it allows you to ask questions to help you learn someone's story. And the more we learn someone's story and the more we understand who they are, then we tend to have a lot more overall understanding, compassion, grace. And that's how championship teams operate, is they really understand and honor the differences with one another. And they use that to ignite energy and ignite the power of team. They don't use it to, pluck one another off. They use it to ignite the power of team. We've coached in that quite a bit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to be mindful of and work towards on a regular basis. And so I think just by introducing those tools and getting people to think about that, I think is a great challenge for those that are listening to today's conversation. So yeah, I mean, you've provided so many great tools and tips. So is there one specific thing that you would like to challenge individuals to be more mindful of or to practice over, the next week before we, circle back with our next Daily Biz Link?
Well, I think that number one, we are still in a time of grief, and we don't really acknowledge sometimes emotional grief. And we're seeing a lot of that being expressed right now. And the tool I go to is Hurt People, Hurt People. And again, this is just a tool that allows us to manage our emotions a little bit, give us the ability to give grace and compassion before we act or react. And the other thing too is that if we will acknowledge that listening helps to dissipate anger, oftentimes that's all people want, is to feel heard. And so if we can remember that our words are not the most powerful always, Sometimes it's our body language. That can also be something to practice. And I would just say getting to know people's story if you don't know their story. And the truth about that is even the people we're closest to, we're not in their shoes, we're not in their mind. So we don't necessarily know their story either. And asking more questions will help us to understand better. So that's what I'd love to challenge everyone is just anchor in the tools, hurt people, practice that, and practice being a good listener.
Thanks so much, Jane, for being with us today to have a conversation about how it's all about change.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's always a pleasure to be here.